So here we are in episode 10 of the MMA GIRL podcast with your host, Jess. First of all, hello. I hope you guys are doing well. As I said at the start of this podcast, this is the 10th episode of the MMA GIRL podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in week after week. And there are a few more of you every time. So that's a real pleasure for me to be here for more and more people who are listening and watching my podcast on YouTube. So as you guys know, this weekend we didn't have any MMA to talk about. We had WrestleMania. I don't know if you guys watch any wrestling, but I did watch WrestleMania because, UFC wasn't on, so I had to watch something, of course. But this weekend, we are back. We are so back. As I said last week when we got Volkanovski his belt back, we are so back, and we have UFC Kansas City for you guys. So I'm excited to talk about that. In this episode, we're going to be talking about UFC Kansas City, of course, my thoughts on the fights that are going to be going down on Saturday night. And I'm going to be predicting what I think will be happening on Saturday between all the guys that are fighting on this amazing pay-per-view in Kansas City. And of course, after that, we'll be going over the latest news and all the good gossip from the fight world that's been going on since we last spoke. So let's go ahead and talk about UFC Kansas City. So I highly recommend, as for most pay-per-views, as for all pay-per-views even, I highly recommend you guys watch the prelims, because this is where we're going to be able to discover new fighters, get to know new people, and of course, find out who's going to be the next star, or who are going to be the next stars of their divisions. Notable fights to look out for on the prelim card of UFC Kansas City is, of course, the fight between Malcolm Wellmaker and his opponent Cameron Saman. Saman we've already seen a few times at UFC, but I wanted to talk more about Malcolm Wellmaker, who made a huge splash at Dana White's Contender Series. So I think this fight is one to look out for, to see if Malcolm is going to be what we hope he will be in the bantamweight division. He has 8 victories, 0 defeats, and he made waves at the UFC's Contender Series with a huge knockout to earn himself a contract, and we've not seen him since. So this is going to be really his chance to show what he's made of on a real UFC card, and I can't wait to see it. Another fight to look out for on the prelims is Damon Blackshear. He's going to be back for a fight against Alateng Haley. So we've seen Blackshear quite a few times. I think he's quite a hit and miss fighter, because as he's a veteran fighter at the UFC, he's been around for a while. He's 30 years old now. I think we've seen him on quite a few cards, but mostly on prelims and maybe a few main cards when it was the Apex or something. And I hope for him that he's going to be able to show what he's made of. I'm looking out for Damon Blackshear. I hope he's going to get a win in this fight and back into the win column, so he can show Dana White that he deserves a place on the main card of another card coming up later on this year. We'll see. So let's go into the main card. This is going to be quite explosive and quite exciting, I think. Of course, we'll talk about this later, but we've got Anthony Smith doing his farewell tour, his last fight. I saw him talking about this on a podcast earlier this week. He was saying, I think even though I've not earned a title in my career, I should be proud of what I've achieved at the UFC. And I think I'm too hard on myself sometimes. I'm not proud of myself enough, just because I've not had a belt wrapped around my waist. But I've been close to getting a belt wrapped around my waist. I've been very much, in the nitty gritty with the best of all of them. So I totally agree with him. Like, he's someone that was a staple at the UFC for quite a few years. So seeing him say farewell after this fight, whether he wins or loses, is going to be sad to see. As we saw in his last fight against Dominic Reyes, he was even asking Dominic to hit him because he wanted to feel something. So it was very sad to see him go down like that, but obviously it was because he lost his coach, who unfortunately died. So I think he lost a bit of his spark, and he knew at that time that maybe it was time to hang the gloves up. But I'm happy he didn't hang the gloves up after his fight against Dominic Reyes. Congratulations obviously to Dominic Reyes, because he's been doing bits since he came back to the UFC with a 3-fight win streak, 3 KOs in the first or second round of his fight. So happy for Dominic Reyes, but obviously seeing Anthony Smith go down like that wasn't the best of things. So I'm happy he's back for his last fight officially. So first fight on the main card of UFC Kansas City, Ian Garry versus Carlos Prates. We have, of course, Ikram Aliskerov and Andrew Muniz, who are going to be fighting. Very excited to see Aliskerov back. We last saw him, if you guys remember, at UFC's Abu Dhabi card, with the main event being him versus the one and only Robert Whittaker. It was supposed to be Whittaker versus Chimaev, which we obviously saw later on, and we know how that went down. But obviously Aliskerov came in last minute. He seemed ready to go up against the best of them, and unfortunately he was just not what it took to beat a legend like Robert Whittaker, who KO'd him in the first round. So congratulations to Robert. But Aliskerov coming off this big KO loss, I'm seeing Aliskerov going back into the win column and winning this fight against Muniz in a late stoppage or a decision. That's my opinion on that one. Next up, we have Randy Brown versus Nicholas Dalby. I love Randy Brown. I think he's really good. This welterweight fighter, he's got a lot of potential. He's 34, so he's on the tail end of his career, but I think he's got a few more years left in him. And I see him winning against Nicholas Dalby, honestly. Dalby being 40 years old, great fighter. Only 5 losses on his record with 23 wins. Not an easy fight for Randy Brown, but I think Randy Brown will get this victory in, and I think he'll win via first or second round stoppage. Next up, we have Michel Pereira versus Abus Magomedov. According to betting odds, Michel Pereira is a favorite in this fight, and I'm going to go with Michel Pereira as well. He's such a unique, stylistically, he's got such a unique style that I don't see Magomedov being able to counter him very much, because he's so unique. You can almost see him in like a video game, you know, like Tekken or something, bouncing off the cage walls and everything. He's just so entertaining when you see him in a ring. So I really think Michel Pereira will win this fight, and I think he'll get a second or third round stoppage or a decision. This fight could likely go to a decision, but I'm hoping Michel Pereira will pull off a second or third round stoppage by KO. Next up, we have Shigedez versus David Onama. In this featherweight fight, Shigedez, who is a great fighter, he's got a great record of 15 wins to 4 losses to Onama's 13 wins to 2 losses. I truly believe that David Onama will win this fight, and I think he'll get it done by decision or a late stoppage, but most likely a decision. I don't think Shigedez has what it takes to beat Onama on Saturday night. Next up, we have, of course, the co-main event of the evening, Anthony Smith versus Ming Yang, who has accepted to do this last leg of Anthony's retirement tour. And as I was saying earlier, this is Anthony Smith's last fight in the UFC Octagon. He's obviously started doing a lot of ESPN work on the mic. He's been doing a lot of commentating. He's got some podcasts going on. So he's set himself up for a nice, lengthy career in UFC and combat sports commentating. So I'm not worried at all for Anthony Smith's future. In this fight, I do believe that he has a lot of disadvantages going into this fight against Ming Yang. He's 10 years older than Ming Yang. He's 36. Ming Yang's 26. Ming Yang being the less experienced fighter on the in this fight, but he's currently at 18 wins and 6 losses. Most of his wins via KO. I honestly don't see Anthony Smith being able to win against Ming Yang, but I think he'll give it his all to not be knocked out in the first or second. So I think if Ming Yang wins this fight, which I think is most likely, Ming Yang will win via late stoppage or decision. And that will be the end of Anthony Smith's career. Good luck to Anthony for his future. And of course, the main event of the evening. I wanted to talk a bit more broadly about this fight before going into my predictions of this fight. There have been a lot of back and forths on social media between Garry and Prates. Both men speak in Portuguese, of course, saying as Ian has married into a Brazilian family and Carlos is Brazilian. So both guys are able to communicate in English and in Portuguese. Prates saying that Ian Garry's never headlined a card like this. He's only headlined one card in the main event, and Carlos Prates has headlined 2 cards in the main event. And he's had already in the UFC, only with 4 fights at the UFC, he's already had 2 bonuses. Ian Machado Garry has never had a bonus yet. So the one thing I wanted to say about this was just fighting styles, because Ian Machado Garry has a fighting style that we saw in Cage Warriors. He was very explosive. He knocked out a lot of his opponents. He's submitted a lot of his opponents as well. But once coming to the UFC at the higher level, I would say he's probably kept it a bit more safe. And he has, of course, been up against some of the best in the business in the welterweight division. So I don't blame him for playing it safe in order to get the decision win. But we are seeing an Ian Garry who can be explosive, but is not always explosive, against someone like Carlos Prates, who is very, very explosive. I just forgot one thing, however. I think you might know what I'm going to be talking about. I couldn't be talking about a Carlos Prates fight without putting on my Fighting Nerds glasses, because of course Carlos Prates is one of the founding members of the Fighting Nerds, along with Rufi, Jean Silva and Caio Borralho, which make up a foursome who are extremely dangerous at the moment. And this is his fifth fight in the UFC. And I really hope that he wins, because he won't lose his 0 at the UFC. He's obviously got a pro record of 21 victories to 6 defeats. But in the UFC, he is 4-0 for now. So will that be going up? This is absolutely his biggest test yet for Carlos Prates. I think that up until now, he's not fought the best of the best in the welterweight division. So we're really seeing him coming up to a point now where he can really prove himself as someone who is solidified in this division. So this is a really big fight for Carlos Prates. If he wins, he will be able to be a ranked UFC welterweight fighter at number 7, and also be able to say, I beat Ian Garry, who was at one point seen as the new Conor McGregor, the prodigy, the Irish prodigy, who has come into the UFC with only now one defeat against Shavkat Rakhmonov. But Ian Garry, being the more well-rounded fighter that he is very dangerous for Carlos Prates and for his record at the UFC. So I think this, for either guys, this is not an easy fight, seeing as Carlos Prates is really quick on the feet and a really dangerous fighter. Now, when I talk about what could happen in this fight, I think honestly that this fight will go the distance. I don't think this fight will end in the first or second round. I think that this fight will end in a finish, because Ian Garry has made it out his mission to finish Carlos Prates. After all the back and forth they've been having, after saying what they had to say to each other, after criticizing their training styles, the fact that Prates smokes, the fact that Ian Garry has never headlined a card apart from one, never had a bonus, all those back and forths, Ian Garry has said, I'm going to finish Carlos Prates, and Carlos Prates obviously always wants to finish his opponents. So I honestly think this fight won't go the distance to the 5th round, but I think that we'll be getting a 3rd, 4th or 5th round finish. And in my opinion, the person who will be finishing the fight will be Ian Garry. I feel like a hypocrite now that I've put my glasses on, and I'm very much a fan of the Fighting Nerds, and I hope that Carlos Prates wins. But if I were to give my honest opinion on the two fighters, I think that Ian Garry will win this fight, and I hope that Carlos Prates proves me wrong. What do you guys think of this fight card? Who have you got for this fight card, and what fights are you most excited to see? And most importantly, let me know what you think of Ian Garry versus Carlos Prates. Is Carlos Prates the real deal? Has he got what it takes to beat an Ian Garry? Or do you think, like me, that despite what we've seen from Carlos Prates up until now, that he'll be stopped in his tracks by Ian Garry and left to wait again for another opportunity to get into that top 10 and in the welterweight division? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So that's going down on Saturday. Here in France, the prelims are starting at midnight and the main card is starting at 3 a.m. So I will be tuning in however late it is for that card. Now, I'm going to be moving on to the latest news and gossip from the MMA world that's happened since we last spoke. Right, so we have a lot to talk about this week in the latest fight news that I've gathered for you guys. Some things you might have heard about, some things you might not. So let's go into Jones Aspinall debate. This thing is just getting annoying because we just hear rumor after rumor and there's no confirmation from the UFC. But as Ariel Helwani said, I really don't think it's the UFC's fault in this one. I know they're doing everything in their power to make this fight happen. But the more we wait, the more we just feel like it won't be happening at all. Not because they've not announced a date, just because they've not announced it at all. And we don't even know if it's happening yet. So I really think this fight won't happen, if I honestly give my opinion. But I hope it does. And I think that if the UFC are doing everything in their power to make it happen, it could happen. It's just looking less and less likely that it will. Latest news on that front, because there were a few things that Chael Sonnen said, but Chael Sonnen was asked last week what he thought of the Jones Aspinall situation. And he said he had it in good authority that the Jones Aspinall fight was done. It was a done deal. They verbally agreed on it. It's not been signed yet, but they verbally agreed on it. And apparently they're just waiting to get a date and agree upon when these guys are going to be fighting. So that's what Chael Sonnen said last week. But this week, Chael Sonnen is going on to saying that potentially the fight won't happen and that the fight will transform into a UFC heavyweight champion fight between Cyril Gane, number 1 in the UFC's heavyweight division, number 2, but technically number 1 if you don't count Jon Jones, and of course the real champion, Tom Aspinall. Now, the problem with that is that already we had Volkov versus Cyril Gane not so long ago, and that fight ended by a decision for Cyril Gane. But as you guys may have seen, there was a huge upset in this fight because obviously Cyril Gane did his best to try and win that fight, but he broke his foot, I think, in the first round. From a spectator's perspective, and of course for Dana White, Cyril Gane did not win that fight, but Volkov got ripped in that fight. But on paper, it was a win for Cyril Gane, which made sure that he secured his spot at the top of the UFC heavyweight division. Now, it will be nice to see Cyril Gane come back. And as we've seen in the past few years, he often comes back in Paris because he's a heavyweight fighter from Paris. And when the UFC come to France in Paris, he often headlines the card. Apart from last year when it was BSD versus Renato Moicano, and we know how that went down. So as the UFC have confirmed that UFC Paris is going to be happening in September, we have no date yet, but I've deducted that potentially it could be happening on the 6th because there are other fights that have been announced for the other weekends in September. So I think it will be happening on the 6th, but we'll see. I think they're rather going to put Cyril Gane against an Almeida or someone like that to see how he goes up against someone that's coming up in the UFC heavyweight division, but that's not yet highly ranked like him, because I think he needs to prove himself again and re-secure his place at the top of the UFC heavyweight division, or if so, lose his spot at the top. Anyway, the subject is not Cyril Gane. The subject is Tom Aspinall, Jon Jones. That is the latest news we've had from Chael Sonnen, but most people are saying that the fight is verbally agreed upon. Most people are saying that the fight is going to happen. According to most sources that are close to both people, Tom Aspinall has had chats with Hunter Campbell quite a few times, and he's saying he's starting to understand what's going to be happening in the next few months for him in the company. But a lot of people are saying that it's kind of a Michael Chandler, Conor McGregor situation where Michael really wants to fight against Conor McGregor, so he's ready to sit it out and wait for Conor to come back. And of course, we know how that ended up. He did not sit out and wait. He sat out and wait for a year and a half, which was long enough to say that I can't wait any longer. And I'm happy he didn't wait any longer, because now we've seen him lost twice in a row, once against Charles Oliveira and recently against Paddy Pimblett at UFC 314. I just think that it was a shame for Chandler to waste so much time on the last part of his career, the last leg of his career. And I think that's what really killed Michael Chandler in this fight. So for Jones and Aspinall, I think that at some point, Tom Aspinall is going to have to say, listen, I'm waiting for him to unify this belt, but I'd rather retire him without even fighting him and then get in the octagon, because this is what's preventing Aspinall to use his prime to his advantage, to earn money, to have fights on his record, because Jon Jones is holding up the whole division now. So what I hope will happen is that at some point Jon Jones will say, listen, don't wait for me, I'll come back later. And I think he said something like that earlier, but I don't know if Tom Aspinall's willing to say, okay, I won't wait for you. Is Tom Aspinall going to be just waiting on the sidelines until Jon Jones knows what he wants to do? Because I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes. We're not hearing what Jon Jones is having to say, apart from criticizing Tom Aspinall for going online and complaining about the situation he's in. But Jon Jones, can you please tell us what you want? Do you really want this fight, or do you not want this fight? That way Tom Aspinall could just go and do other things and unify his belt with another person and just get along with his career, because we know that Tom Aspinall has yet to show us the best of him, and we've already seen some amazing fights from Tom Aspinall. He has currently the record for the shortest fights in UFC history. I think his average fight time is 2 minutes and 33 seconds, which is just completely nothing. Are we going to see Tom Aspinall come back and be able to show us what he's made of? So I'm just hoping that at some point we're going to get this concluded and we can finally put this in the books and say, listen, Jon Jones just wasn't ready to fight Tom Aspinall, but Tom Aspinall was able to unify his belt and finally become UFC's heavyweight champion. But that for now is the only news I've got for UFC's Tom Aspinall, Jon Jones situation, which is ever so complicating. Next up, the topic of the hour, Tuporia. Not the only topic of the hour, of course, but one of the topics that's always on people's mouths is Ilia Tuporia. He has a few things to say about a few things. First of all, he's recently come out saying he believes, I think he spoke about this on Joe Rogan's podcast, because he did an episode of Joe Rogan's podcast that is doing very well at the moment. So I recommend you go check that out. Tuporia is saying that he thinks the UFC should get rid of weight cutting altogether. He thinks that if you walk around between 5 to 10 pounds over your weight class, you should be immediately upgraded to the weight class above you. I think we should get rid of too much of a weight cut. If you walk around way too heavy, I would say about 20 pounds over, which is in a lot of fighters' cases, that is it. I think we should get rid of that, because honestly, weight cutting, it looks really dangerous. It is really dangerous for the body. And I don't think they're doing themselves any good at all. And as we saw from the video of Ilia Tuporia cutting for his last featherweight fight, he showed us just how difficult it was for him to cut down to 145, considering that at 155, he only have to cut down 2 or 3 kilos, which is a lot better for his health and for his body. On other news regarding Tuporia, he, of course, has tweeted recently that he is entering a fight camp, which means that a fight will soon be announced for Ilia Tuporia. Or what I believe is that the UFC have asked him to enter into fight camp because he will be fighting someone in the next few months, but they don't yet know who. Because, of course, the situation between Islam Makhachev and Jack Della Maddalena needs to be obviously established once the fight between Bilal Muhammad and Jack Della Maddalena goes down. Because, of course, if Jack Della Maddalena is able to defeat Bilal Muhammad, then Islam Makhachev is prepared to vacate his belt and move up to the welterweight division, which means that will leave a vacant belt ready, available for Ilia Tuporia versus someone. That being said, recently, Charles Oliveira was asked, would you be ready to fight an Ilia Tuporia? And he said, absolutely not, if it's not for the belt. So he currently is looking to have a fight against Max Holloway for the BMF belt, and his next fight in the lightweight division or on outside of the BMF title fight would, of course, be a title shot, because he thinks he deserves a title fight. That's a bit interesting, because I think he might need another fight before being eligible for a title fight. But maybe the UFC will give him a title fight if Islam vacates his belt against Ilia Tuporia. That could be cool. But he said, word for word, he would not fight Ilia Tuporia unless it's for the belt, the vacant title. So that's what's happening on the Ilia Tuporia lightweight title front. Of course, Islam Makhachev will not fight Ilia Tuporia unless he deserves it. And for him, he deserves it once he's fought someone at 155. And, I can't help but agree with that. So we'll see what's going to go down. But in any case, Ilia is in camp right now. So there will be a fight announcement, I think, in next month or so. Another fight that's been announced recently is Vincent Luque. He's coming back into the octagon against none other than Kevin Holland. And I'm announcing this fight on this podcast just because it's Kevin Holland, because what a guy, honestly. He's coming back on June the 7th for the UFC 316. It's been announced recently, and he's just the most active fighter on the roster by far. I think he's trying to get a record for the most active fighter in UFC history, I think. So I don't think he's far from getting that record, honestly. So just, a quickie on that one, because Kevin Holland's doing bits right now, and I think that will be his 3rd fight of the year, if I'm not mistaken, or at least his 2nd. But I was able to see him in the flesh in London for UFC London, where he won via decision. And now he's coming back only a couple months later for UFC's 316 card on June 7th. So good on him getting the fights in. Hopefully we'll see him again in the win column a second time, but Vincent Luque is going to be a much harder opponent for him. So I can't wait to see what's going to go down between those two in the octagon. I don't know if you guys have been following Israel Adesanya on social media recently. He has been saying a lot about his fighting future and his future in this sport, as he is 36 years old. So the question obviously comes about, is he going to retire? Is this the end of his career? Blah, blah, blah. I think, as most fighters would do, I think he doesn't want to retire verbally or via social media without it being in the octagon doing an official retirement fight, just like Anthony Smith's doing on Saturday. He has said that he would like to get his revenge against Sean Strickland, because he was bullied when he was a child, and Sean Strickland is really this kind of bully-ish character, and he said that he just wants to get his own back on Sean Strickland. And he said that to none other than David Goggins, who is currently training Israel Adesanya to work on his cardio and his endurance, because that's what Israel feels like he's missing right now. He just lost a fight against Imavov, which was a huge loss for him via KO in the second round. Did not expect Imavov to KO Israel Adesanya that easily. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. He lost against Duplessis, lost against Sean Strickland, now lost against Imavov. He needs to get back into the win column if he's even hoping to stay in the top 5 or 6 of the UFC's middleweight division. I believe that a fight against Sean Strickland would be a great idea, seeing as he wants to get his own back on Sean Strickland for some of the stuff he's been saying. And just in general, because he said, I got my ass whooped by Sean Strickland over 5 rounds. He thinks he didn't even win a single round. If that, he won at least 1 round, but that's it. And he wants to get back into the win column. And he thinks, whilst training with David Goggins, that will lead to him being able to hone in his skills and match that with some of the best cardio workouts he could do in his life, with someone David Goggins, who's 50 years old, who has the best cardio and endurance of anyone of his age. And he can sleep people that are 20 years, 30 years old, and he's just crazy. Obviously, we saw him come out with Tony Ferguson at his last fight, and that didn't work out very well for Tony Ferguson, but that does not mean that David Goggins is cursed. I think that really it's just a case of working with David Goggins for the right reasons. I think Tony Ferguson tried to only do David Goggins' extreme workouts and didn't really do any sparring or any work in the octagon, which is where his disadvantage came about. That being said, Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland 2, I would love to see. And I can't wait to see what Izzy is able to do with David Goggins, how that's going to be able to change him physically, and of course, in the octagon. Another guy who's been speaking about his future in the UFC was Justin Gaethje. He's not said much, of course, but he tweeted out saying that I've not got long left, so enjoy the show while you can. That's all he said, but we can obviously deduct that he's pertaining to the fact that he's at the tail end of his career. He's of course not talked about when he would like to retire. He said that if he got knocked out by Fiziev in his last fight, that he would have hung up the gloves at that point, which means that he's not far from hanging up the gloves. So for all us Justin Gaethje fans, we've got to get used to it. He may be coming back once or twice in the octagon, but it's going to be the end very soon. So I'm hoping to see Justin Gaethje again this year at some point. Don't know when he's planning to come back. We've had no news on that. But enjoy it when you can, guys. Not much left in him. UFC Atlanta has been announced with just the headlining fights for now. The headlining fight is going to be Usman versus Joaquin Buckley. That's what's rumored for UFC Atlanta. It's not yet been officially announced, but it seems perfect to me. As we talked about in the week before last podcast, Kamaru Usman is finally looking to come back. He feels ready to come back after his knee injuries, and he wanted to fight Joaquin Buckley, Sean Brady, or Shavkat in any order. And I think the UFC are giving him Buckley to see how he matches up to a Kamaru Usman, who is a legend in the UFC. Buckley being a newbie in the welterweight division who's come down from the middleweight division and is doing bits of the welterweight division. So I think it's the perfect fight to bring back a legend and put him up against a newbie, a young, exciting fighter like Joaquin Buckley. And we see it time and time again, which is what I respect when a fighter like Usman accepts fights like that. When a newbie fights a legend, you know that legends taking a risk to lose the fight to help the newbie come back and get up in the ranks of the division. So all respect to Kamaru Usman. I think he's got a great chance in this fight, and I can't wait to see these guys in the octagon facing each other. Next up is news a little bit around Islam Makhachev again. I heard that Islam Makhachev's coach has recently spoke out about Paddy Pimblett, because of course Paddy Pimblett is the talk of the town in lightweight division, apart from of course Ilia Tuporia. Paddy Pimblett being 8th in the lightweight division now, Islam's coach thinks that he could take on anybody, and if his next fight or the fight after next is a title shot, then Islam's coach says he truly deserves it. So I can't wait to see what's next for Paddy Pimblett. As I said last week, I think he is just clutching at the start of what will be the most amazing career for him. So I can't wait to see what he's going to be able to do against Charles Oliveira, against Arman Tarzukian, against Justin Gaethje. Obviously, we can't say he'll be facing Dustin Poirier, because of course Dustin Poirier is probably most likely going to be facing Max Holloway for his last fight in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I think Paddy Pimblett, he's probably going to face someone again before he fights for the title. But in the top 5, there aren't many people left. So I'd like to see him against Charles Oliveira. I know Charles doesn't want to fight anyone unless it's for the belt. But I think a Paddy versus Charles fight would be insane. And in any case, it's cool that Islam's coach recognizes that Paddy Pimblett has all it takes to be a title contender and hopefully one day a champion. Injury update. We don't know for sure, but there have been some sightings and pictures of Sean O'Malley with crutches. Now, this could mean anything because he's not admitted nor declared that he's injured. So crutches or no crutches, the fight against Merab for the rematch for his title at bantamweight is still on. There's no fight announcements have been happening. There's no council announcements have been happening. So for now, I'm saying I don't think that the Sean O'Malley Merab fight is off, but it is quite concerning when you see him on crutches. But it could just be a slight niggle on one of his legs that is kind of hurting him. So he prefers getting on crutches to alleviate some of the weight on his leg. But I hope it's just nothing crazy serious. But I think that if it was something serious, they would have already announced that the fight was cancelled. So for now, Sean O'Malley versus Merab is still happening at 316. But we're not sure exactly if that's true. So that's it, folks. I don't have much more fight news for you guys up to date. I think I've said everything that's happened since last week. And let me know if you guys have heard any of the rumors I've been talking about just now. And let me know in the comments down below what you think of the UFC Kansas City card. And what do you guys think of the lightweight division situation? Do you think that Ilia Tuporia will be fighting Islam Makhachev in a couple of months? Or do you think the fight that's going to be announced is for a number 1 contenders fight against someone like Arman Tarzukian or Charles Oliveira, considering that Charles does not want to fight him? Thank you so much for listening and watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week for a next episode where we'll be covering UFC's Kansas City, all the events that have been happening, the latest news, and the next UFC fight card. Until next time, bye.